Let me tell you something important. You see it all around you. People who have plenty of sense, but they don't put that sense to work. They've got sharp ideas, big visions, fine intentions, and then very little follow through. And you start asking yourself, how does that happen? How can a person study for years, think it through, get ready, and still not move an inch, still not follow through, still not do the very thing they already understand they ought to do? Here's what I've learned. There's a space, quiet, almost invisible, between understanding and execution. And in that space, that's where a lot of hopes get buried. It usually doesn't arrive like a disaster. It isn't some loud collapse or some dramatic mistake. No, most dreams don't die with a bang. They simply thin out and fade in the distance. They disappear somewhere between I ought to and I did. They get lost between intention and action. And if you don't watch that space carefully, it starts to claim your whole life. You end up with a life filled with decent intentions and too many missed chances. A life of I could have, I almost, I was going to. That's not the life you want, and it isn't the life anyone hopes for. Yet it's the life most people settle into. Not because they were ignorant, but because they never practiced what they already knew. And it can sting to admit it later. It wasn't a shortage of information. It wasn't a lack of opportunity. It wasn't even luck that stopped you. It was postponement. It was hesitation. It was the little excuses, those quiet choices to stay where it's comfortable and familiar instead of stepping into the discomfort where progress is made. Now listen, I'm not saying learning doesn't matter. Of course it matters, but knowledge is only the seed. It isn't the harvest. It isn't the fruit. If you want results, you must act. You must move. You must do. This session isn't about pumping you up for a few minutes. It isn't about collecting one more idea. It isn't about waiting until the mood is right or the timing feels perfect. This is about closing that distance, the one between knowing and doing, because that distance is the difference between who you've been and who you could become. And every day you leave that gap unattended, the life you truly want drifts a little farther away. This is your chance to narrow it on purpose, consciously, deliberately, and for good. To stop rehearsing and start constructing. To stop getting ready and start practicing. To stop waiting and start working. Because the moment you begin, yes, even clumsily, even imperfectly, you step out of theory and into change. And that's where real progress starts. Now, let's be honest. Information is everywhere. It's close at hand. It's on your shelf. It's in the conversations you've already had. There's no shortage of books, programs, recordings, or advice. And yet with all that available, only a small number of people truly change. Only a few take what they've learned and apply it long enough to produce a result. You can walk into a bookstore and find a mountain of material on money, health, relationships, and managing your time. So the trouble hasn't been a lack of information for a long while. The trouble is that knowing has begun to replace doing. People feel accomplished because they read a chapter, listen to a talk, or watch something inspiring. For a moment, they collect the emotional payoff that usually belongs to action, without actually taking any action. It's like reading about exercise and thinking you've gotten stronger. You haven't. But the mind gets just enough stimulation to pretend progress has been made. You see, knowledge without application is sneaky. It creates the appearance of advancement. You feel as though you're improving, but you're not. You're gathering insights. And insight alone doesn't reshape your body. Insight alone doesn't build an enterprise. Insight alone doesn't grow your savings. Insight alone doesn't correct habits. Only action does that. Most people don't need a new breakthrough idea. They've already heard the right idea. What they need is the discipline to do something with it, to apply it, repeat it, and stay with it long enough to see the payoff. That's where the shortfall is, not in comprehension, but in execution. Years ago, I met a fellow who had consumed hundreds of business books. He could quote authors, explain systems, describe models, and show you notebooks filled with plans and charts and timelines. But when I asked him, "What have you built?" he lowered his eyes and said, in effect, "Nothing." And the reason is simple. Learning doesn't construct anything. Action does. For all his studying, he never stepped forward. He never crossed that line. You don't get rewarded for what you understand. The marketplace pays for what you produce, what you deliver, what you follow through on. That's why someone with less information but more discipline will often outrun someone with impressive knowledge and inconsistent action. And here's a dangerous place to live, believing you're making progress when you're really just staying busy. You keep reading, you keep planning, you keep preparing, but you never take off. You never get airborne. Why? Because movement isn't the same as progress. Studying isn't the same as growth. Thinking isn't the same as building. Only action takes you across the line. If understanding were enough, everybody would be wealthy, healthy, and fulfilled. But that isn't how it works. Knowing is the easy part. Doing is where the work starts. That's where resistance shows up. That's where excuses whisper. That's where you discover whether you're serious or merely curious. So let me ask you plainly, what do you already know you should do, yet you still haven't done it? Now let me ask you to look yourself in the mirror with a little honesty. What habit have you analyzed, discussed, maybe even written down, yet you still haven't put it into practice? What opportunity have you examined and researched but never stepped into? That's the gap, and that's the dividing line between remaining where you are and moving into what's next. Don't mistake learning for living, and don't confuse studying with doing. Sooner or later, you've got to stop taking in and start carrying out. Sooner or later, you've got to quit gathering information and begin applying what you already understand, because that's the turning point. That's where change starts. So the question becomes, if people already have a good idea of what to do, why don't they do it? And more often than not, it isn't a motivation problem. It's fear. It's hesitation. It's the comfort of staying where it feels safe. Because as long as you're still planning, you can tell yourself you haven't failed. As long as you're still getting ready, you don't have to face the possibility that it might not work. Knowing feels secure. Knowing lets you stay protected. You can live in theory for a lifetime and never risk embarrassment, never risk failure, never risk discovering that your best effort still needed improvement. That's why people get stuck. Not because they don't want progress, but because they're afraid of what action might reveal. There's a strange comfort in preparation. You can stay busy, stay occupied, and from the outside, it can even look like you're moving forward. But deep down, you know the truth. You're circling, avoiding the one thing that changes results, execution. Then there's another trap, perfectionism. Some folks decide, if I can't do it perfectly, I won't do it at all. And they keep searching for the best method, the perfect plan, the ideal moment. And while they're waiting for perfect conditions, they miss the chance to make progress with what they already have. The irony is simple. You won't get good at something by thinking about it. You get good at it by starting, even when you're awkward at first. You can't refine what you never practice. A perfectionist keeps sharpening the pencil, and the page stays blank, because perfection isn't the goal. Movement is. And until you're willing to be a little imperfect, you won't be consistent. And without consistency, you can forget about success. And then there's overwhelm. People say, "Oh, I don't know where to start." And because they can't see the whole path, they never take the first step. They stare at the whole mountain instead of just the next few feet. They think about the entire book instead of the first page, or the whole transformation instead of a simple walk around the block. But here's what you must understand. Every major change is built from small disciplines practiced day after day. If you focus on the next small action, you can slip right past that feeling of overwhelm. Sometimes the problem is overconsumption. Some people become addicted to more input, more advice, more programs, more techniques, until they're so stuffed with information they can't move. They turn into collectors of knowledge instead of practitioners of it. And no matter how much you know, it doesn't count until it's used. Procrastination is another reason people stay stuck. They say they're putting it off until later, but what they're really avoiding is the discomfort that comes with starting, doubt, awkwardness, resistance. So they delay, not always from laziness, but from avoiding that first moment of friction. But here's the good news. If you'll just begin, if you'll take the first step, everything after that starts to get easier. And for some people, it isn't fear or perfectionism or even procrastination. Let me tell you something important. Sometimes it isn't ignorance that holds people back. It's comfort. They get settled into the current routine, even when that routine isn't paying what they want it to pay. Change asks for disruption. It asks for energy. It asks for effort. And it will always be easier to stay where things feel familiar, even when they're unfulfilling. But you've got to ask yourself, is the comfort worth the future you're trading away? Is the ease of today worth the weight of tomorrow's regret? Because every day you stay parked in knowing, you're giving up ground, you're trading progress for maintenance, and maintenance never builds a better life. You were not designed to rehearse forever. You weren't meant to sit on the edge of your potential, planning and preparing while opportunity quietly slips by. You're built to move, to try, to apply, to do everything you want. Growth, success, influence, it lives on the other side of action. So the illusion has to end. Knowing isn't enough, and you already know that because you've seen it and you've felt it. People stay stuck because stuck feels safer than stepping into the unknown, but safety isn't success, and safety isn't progress, and safety isn't freedom. If you want things to change, you've got to break the pattern. You've got to stop settling for the security of understanding and start developing the courage to do. Most folks are waiting to feel ready before they begin, waiting for confidence, waiting for motivation. But here's what I've found. Those feelings rarely arrive first. They show up after you've started. They don't lead the process. They follow it. You don't act because you feel motivated. You feel motivated because you acted. You don't move because you're confident. You build confidence by moving. The emotions everyone is waiting on are usually produced by doing, not the other way around. And once someone understands that, they stop waiting, they stop hesitating, and they begin. This is where discipline begins. Discipline is the bridge between goals and accomplishment, and it means doing what needs to be done whether you feel like it or not, especially when you don't feel like it. Discipline doesn't bargain with your moods. It doesn't ask for perfect conditions. It simply shows up and does the work. You want to know what separates the amateur from the professional. It isn't talent, it isn't resources, and it isn't intelligence. It's discipline. Amateurs do it when they feel like it. Professionals do it because it's time to do it. They don't let feelings run the calendar, and they don't let moods determine the schedule. They act. And you don't need to be extraordinary to start doing. You need to be committed. You need to decide that showing up matters more than feeling good, and that action matters more than comfort. You need to decide the life you want is worth more than the excuses you've been using to avoid it. Doing doesn't require perfection. Nothing starts flawless. Doing is messy and clumsy and uncomfortable, but it's necessary. And the only way to get good at something is to be willing to be bad at it first. Discipline says, I'll do it anyway. I'll show up tired. I'll show up uncertain. I'll show up nervous, but I'll show up. And if you keep showing up, you begin to build something powerful. You build resilience. You build momentum. And you start to reshape your identity. You stop thinking of yourself as someone who tries, and you start becoming someone who follows through. And that identity matters because when doing becomes part of who you are, you don't have to wrestle with yourself every day. You just do it, like brushing your teeth, like tying your shoes, like going to work. It becomes automatic. That's the goal. Not to force action forever, but to practice it long enough that it becomes part of you. Most people are trying to feel their way into action, but the better path is acting your way into the feelings. Show up first. Confidence will come later. Do it tired. Energy will come later. Do it afraid. Courage will come later. The emotions you're looking for are usually waiting on the far side of movement. So start small. One action, one task, one habit. Don't wait to feel ready. Begin. Keep your actions simple. Keep your promises to yourself, and every time you follow through, you prove to yourself you're serious. That's what changes everything. Not talent, not knowledge, not a perfect plan. What changes everything is consistent action. A few simple disciplines practiced each day, quiet and unglamorous follow through, not once in a while, but daily. That's how the gap closes. That's how knowing becomes doing. That's how dreams stop fading and start becoming real. People keep waiting, waiting for the right time, waiting for a fresh start, waiting for the pressure to ease, waiting for motivation to strike. And while they wait, time passes, opportunities fade, and life keeps moving. You've heard it. It's just not a good time right now. But think about it. When is it ever convenient to change your life? When does the calendar clear, the stress vanish, and the skies open up to announce the perfect moment? It doesn't happen because perfect conditions don't exist. The right time isn't a date, it's a decision. And that's how anything important ever begins. Not because everything lined up, but because someone decided to stop waiting and start moving. They said, ready or not, I'm going. And that moment, that decision, is what separates the crowd from the few. Most people dress fear up in nicer clothes. They call it planning. They call it timing. They call it being wise. But underneath, it's hesitation, the part of a person that wants progress without discomfort, growth without effort, and rewards without risk. Now, you and I both know it doesn't work that way. If you won't begin when it's a little messy, a little uncertain, and a little inconvenient, there's a good chance you won't begin at all. Action doesn't start when you feel ready. It starts when you get committed. Committed to the result, committed to the process, committed to doing it now, not later, because later has a way of turning into never. And the longer you wait, the heavier it gets to lift yourself out of the waiting. Here's what you must understand. You don't need perfect conditions. You need a decision. You need a first step. You need to say, I'm starting, even if you don't know every detail and even if you don't feel completely prepared. Don't sit in the same spot hoping for perfect. That's not progress. That's postponement. That's how you cross the gap. Progress begins the day you move. You're not going to feel 100% ready. The mind isn't built that way. It leans towards safety, and it can always find one more reason to wait, one more piece that isn't quite in place. But your future isn't waiting on your comfort. It's waiting on your courage. It's waiting on you to step. I've watched people wait for the right moment until the moment passed them by. And I've seen others begin before they felt ready and change everything, not because they had it all figured out, but because they figured it out as they went. You don't have to be perfect. You simply have to be in motion. Don't wait for fear to leave. It might not. Do it afraid. Don't wait for the plan to be flawless. It won't be. Do it uncertain. Don't wait for conditions to be ideal. They rarely are. Do it anyway. Because doing creates clarity. Doing gives you experience. Doing produces results. And many of the things you've been waiting for, confidence, direction, momentum, they tend to show up after you begin, not before. Every day you delay, you train yourself that delay is acceptable, that comfort outranks growth. But every time you act, especially when it's inconvenient, you build a new pattern, movement, progress, and success. So forget waiting for the right conditions. Start under the wrong ones. Start when it's untidy, when you're unsure, when it feels uncomfortable. Because that's how anything worthwhile gets built. Most of what you admire, businesses, careers, strong relationships, began with imperfect beginnings and people who refused to wait for perfect weather. The distance between knowing and doing doesn't close with more time. It closes with action, with the willingness to begin before everything is ready. And once you begin, momentum has a chance. Clarity comes. Results start to follow, not because it was the perfect time, but because you decided you weren't going to wait any longer. Everybody's looking for the secret and the shortcut, but the real shortcut is simple and plain: daily discipline, small, simple actions repeated day after day. That's it. You can skip steps, you can pause, you can restart, but every stop costs you. Every restart resets momentum. Every delay weakens the habit. And the person who just keeps going, quietly, steadily, moves ahead, not because they're faster, not because they're smarter, but because they didn't stop. Success doesn't hand the prize to the most intense. It pays the best rewards to the most consistent. You don't need a few heroic days, and you don't need to overhaul your whole life in one swing. You simply need to do something worthwhile every day. That's how progress is stacked. That's how discipline grows muscle. And that's how the distance between what you know and what you do finally starts to disappear. Most people flame out because they demand too much, too fast. They get excited, they go full speed for a few days, and then they vanish. But the people who win, they learn to pace themselves. They keep it small. They keep it simple. They keep it daily. They don't need hype. They don't need a crowd. They don't need applause. They just build quietly one day at a time. I've watched it happen over and over again. Someone reads a book, attends a seminar, gets stirred up and says, "That's it, I'm changing everything." Then they try to rebuild their schedule, their eating, their finances, all in 1 week. And by the second week, it's gone. Why? Because intensity will wear you out. But discipline is something you can live with. Discipline isn't loud. It doesn't make a scene, but it shows up again and again, whether it feels good or not, whether the conditions are ideal or not, whether anybody is watching or not. Discipline isn't about excitement. It's about decision. It's about follow-through. It's about doing the thing when you're tired, when you're bored, when you're distracted. And you don't need dramatic progress every day. That's not the goal. The goal is don't go backward. Keep moving. Show up. Do the work. Some days you'll feel strong and some days will feel like a grind. That's normal. But if you keep doing, you keep growing. If you keep building, you eventually arrive. It's like compound interest. You don't always see the payoff right away, but over time the results become undeniable. Day 1 doesn't look like much. Day 10 still feels small. But day 100, day 300, that's when things start to show. And when people ask, "How did you do it?" the answer is almost never glamorous. It's usually the same: "I just kept going." Doing daily is about rhythm. It's about routine. It's about creating a structure that supports your goals. Then you don't have to debate yourself every day. You don't have to renegotiate with your feelings every morning. You already decided, and now you follow through. And once that rhythm is established, once doing becomes automatic, you've already won a big part of the battle, because now the gap is gone. You're not stuck in theory. You're not circling and planning and hesitating. You're living, you're building, you're becoming. Doing daily isn't flashy. It won't impress anyone at first, but give it time, and it becomes unstoppable. It becomes the reason you cross the finish line while others are still getting ready. Your life won't change all at once, but it will change one consistent day at a time. You want the shortcut? This is it. Show up. Do the work. Do it again tomorrow. Because the truth is, you already know what you need to do. You've known for a while. That isn't the problem. The problem has been the delay, the hesitation, the waiting, the false comfort of knowing without doing. That's where dreams fall apart. Not from a lack of desire, not from a lack of knowledge, but from a lack of execution. So at some point, you've got to stand in front of the mirror and ask, am I doing it? Not talking about it, not reading about it, not thinking about it, doing it. That quiet little space between knowing and doing, That's where it happens or it doesn't. That's the turning point. That's where lives change or stay the same, and you get to decide. You always get to decide. So make the decision now. Close the gap. Stop waiting. Stop hoping. Stop preparing forever. Start doing. Start moving. Start building. Start practicing. Do it without the perfect plan. Do it without the perfect conditions. Do it without waiting to feel ready. Begin. Because the difference between knowing and doing is everything. It's the difference between almost and actually, between potential and progress, between the life you talk about and the life you live. So take the next step today, not tomorrow, not later, today. Even if it's small, even if it's uncertain, even if it's uncomfortable, take it, because once you start doing, everything starts to change.